somewhere in the mountains of West Virginia, during the most anxious years of the Cold War. A door existed the public was never meant to see. Above ground, everything looked ordinary. Luxury suites, crystal chandeliers, quiet golf courses. Politicians laughed in banquet halls. Diplomats raised glasses. Guests wandered elegant corridors as if the world outside was perfectly safe. But beneath their feet, far below the marble floors, something else waited. Concrete, steel, silence, a hidden complex carved into the mountain. Walls thick enough to survive the unthinkable. Massive blast doors, ready to seal in seconds. Because in those years, the fear was constant. A siren, a flash in the sky, a nuclear strike that could erase Washington in minutes. And if that happened, the United States had a plan. Not for the president alone, for Congress. Hundreds of lawmakers rushed into a secret underground refuge designed to keep the American government alive. Dormitories waiting in darkness, communication rooms prepared to speak to a shattered nation. For more than 30 years, almost no one knew it existed, hidden beneath one of America's most luxurious resorts, the Greenbrier bunker. The idea did not emerge overnight. It grew out of the deepest anxieties of the early Cold War. After the end of World War II, the United States entered a new kind of conflict with the Soviet Union. Confrontation not fought through open battlefields, but through weapons capable of ending civilization itself. In August 1949, the balance of power shifted dramatically. The Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb. The American monopoly on nuclear weapons was over. Inside Washington, military planners immediately began asking questions that had never existed before in human history. How does a government survive nuclear war? The problem was not theoretical. By the early 1950s, both superpowers were developing thermonuclear weapons, hydrogen, bombs capable of destroying entire metropolitan regions in seconds. If one of those weapons detonated over the capital, Washington, D.C. could disappear almost instantly. And with it, the leadership of the United States. Presidents had contingency plans. The executive branch had relocation sites. But Congress presented a logistical nightmare. The House of Representatives alone had 435 members. Add the Senate, leadership staff, communications teams, and essential personnel, and the number climbed rapidly. Hundreds of people would have to disappear from Washington within hours, possibly minutes, and resume the work of government somewhere else. Without them, laws could not be passed. Emergency authority could not be legitimized. The constitutional structure itself might fracture. By the mid-1950s, continuity of government planning had become a specialized discipline within national defense circles. Buried inside classified discussions were proposals for hidden relocation centers, hardened command posts, and underground shelters designed to survive nuclear blast and radioactive fallout. At the center of these preparations was the administration of Dwight D. Eisenhower. Understood nuclear war, perhaps better than any civilian leader of his time. As the former Supreme Allied commander in Europe during World War II, he had witnessed the full scale of modern warfare. Now the weapons were far more powerful. Under his presidency, federal agencies began developing elaborate contingency plans for the survival of American leadership. Mountains were studied. Geological formations were tested. Remote regions within driving distance of Washington were quietly evaluated. The objective was simple, yet unprecedented. If the capital was destroyed, the United States government had to continue functioning somewhere else. Secret facilities were already being built for the executive branch and military command. But one crucial piece was missing. Congress needed its own refuge, a place large enough to house the entire legislative body, secure, isolated, and close enough to Washington that lawmakers could be transported there quickly during a crisis. And just as importantly, it needed to exist without attracting attention. The solution came from an unlikely place. Not a military base, not a mountain fortress, but a luxury resort hidden in the Appalachian Mountains, already known to American presidents, generals, and political elites. A place where powerful people had gathered quietly for generations. A place called the Greenbrier. By the late 1950s, the resort had hosted diplomats, industrial magnates, and more than 20 future U.S. presidents. It had even served the federal government before. During World War II, the property had been converted into an internment site for Axis diplomats, and later into a U.S. Army hospital where wounded soldiers were treated under the supervision of military leaders. Its remote location, surrounded by the mountains of West Virginia, made it discreet. Its distance from Washington, roughly a half-day drive, made it practical, and its reputation as a private retreat made it the perfect cover. In 1958, a secret authorization quietly moved through Congress. The project would carry a code name, Project Greek Island. Officially, the Greenbrier Resort would simply expand its facilities. New guest rooms, additional conference halls, medical infrastructure. Construction at a luxury hotel rarely raised suspicion. But beneath those public plans, something very different was about to begin. Deep under the hills surrounding the resort, American engineers were preparing to carve out one of the most unusual Cold War facilities ever built. A hidden congressional sanctuary, a place where the legislative branch of the United States government could continue operating, even after nuclear war. In 1958, construction crews arrived quietly at the Greenbrier. To the public, the project seemed ordinary, a luxury resort expanding its facilities, new guest rooms, additional conference space, a modern exhibition hall. But behind the official blueprints, the real project had already been approved in Washington. The code name was Project Greek Island, and its true purpose was known only to a small circle of federal planners operating under the authority of President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Within months, the hillside surrounding the resort began to change. Workers carved a massive excavation into the Appalachian shale beneath the new wing of the hotel. Concrete trucks arrived in long convoys, day after day, pouring material into an underground framework that few people fully understood. Over the course of nearly 3 years, roughly 50,000 tons of reinforced concrete were poured into the structure. The bunker that emerged was immense, nearly 100,000 square feet of hardened underground space, hidden beneath what guests believed was simply a new addition to the resort. Its walls were built to survive catastrophic force. Concrete nearly 2 feet thick surrounded the complex. Above it, a roof slab protected by 20 feet of packed earth concealed the structure from above. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. Inside, the facility was designed like a self-contained underground government. Entry points were sealed by enormous steel blast doors manufactured by the Mosler Safe Company. One of the primary vault doors stood nearly 15 feet tall, more than 12 feet wide, and weighed 28 tons. When closed, the steel barrier could isolate the entire bunker from the outside world. Some entrances were hidden in plain sight. In one section of the resort spa, a blank concrete wall concealed a 25-ton blast door that could slide shut. During an emergency, guests walked past it every day, unaware of what stood on the other side. Maintaining secrecy required constant improvisation. The excavation produced enormous quantities of rock and soil, material that could easily expose the scale of the underground project, so the debris was quietly repurposed. Truckloads of excavated rock were used to expand a nearby golf course on the resort grounds, while other shipments were transported to help extend the runway at the local airport. Even the construction crews themselves were kept partially in the dark. Many believed they were simply building structural foundations for the new West Virginia wing of the hotel, but some details raised eyebrows. An unusual number of restrooms appeared in the architectural plans. At one point, a contractor reportedly noticed 110 new urinals being installed and jokingly asked what kind of exhibit required so many facilities. The answer, of course, remained classified, above ground. Construction continued as though it were simply another resort expansion. The West Virginia wing opened publicly with an exhibit hall, meeting rooms, and event spaces for conventions and social gatherings. But the large exhibit hall served another purpose. Hidden walls inside the hall concealed the entrances to the underground complex. During an emergency, the space could be sealed with blast doors, transforming an ordinary conference area into the gateway to a nuclear survival facility. Beyond those doors, the bunker extended through a maze of corridors and chambers. Inside were spaces designed specifically for the United States Congress. A 470-seat auditorium was arranged to resemble the chamber of the House of Representatives, large enough for all 435 members of the House. Nearby stood a smaller chamber for the United States Senate, with roughly 130 seats. There was even a large hall designed for joint sessions of Congress, allowing the legislative branch to continue formal proceedings underground. Sleeping quarters filled entire sections of the bunker. Rows of metal bunk beds stretched across large dormitories, eventually totaling more than 1,100 beds. For decades, every single bed had an assignment, one for each member of Congress, and additional space for essential aides and staff. Elsewhere in the bunker, planners constructed facilities meant to replicate the basic functions of daily life. A 400-seat cafeteria with industrial kitchen equipment, medical rooms equipped with surgical tools and an operating table, communication centers capable of broadcasting messages to the nation, radio studios, television broadcast rooms, and secure telephone booths for encrypted conversations with surviving government agencies. Even the dining areas were designed with psychological survival in mind. Walls were painted with images of pastoral landscapes, artificial windows that simulated daylight for people living underground. Behind the scenes, powerful life support systems were installed. Two-story diesel generators capable of supplying electricity for extended periods, massive water storage tanks, air filtration systems designed to remove radioactive fallout particles from incoming air. The entire complex was engineered so that hundreds of people could survive inside, isolated from the outside world for months. Every corridor, every generator, every bunk bed served a single purpose. If nuclear war destroyed Washington, the United States, Congress could continue governing from deep beneath the mountains of West Virginia. And when construction finally ended, the bunker disappeared into silence. Guests returned to the Greenbrier Resort. Conventions filled the exhibit hall. Tourists wandered through elegant hotel corridors. Just beneath their feet, one of the most secret facilities of the Cold War waited quietly in the dark, ready for a war that never came. When construction finally ended in the early 1960s, the bunker did not sit abandoned. It had to remain ready. Every generator, every air filter, every communication line had to function perfectly, even if decades passed before the facility was ever used. But maintaining a secret government bunker beneath a luxury resort required something unusual, a cover story. Officially, the systems inside the West Virginia wing were maintained by a private company based in Arlington, Virginia. The firm was called Forsyth Associates. On paper, its employees were simply technicians, cable television engineers, communication specialists, maintenance staff responsible for the resort's broadcast equipment. But their real mission was far more sensitive. They were the caretakers of one of the United States government's most secret Cold War facilities. The first manager assigned to the site was John Landis. Before arriving at the Greenbrier, Landis had served as a cryptographic specialist in the U.S. Army Signal Corps at the Pentagon. His expertise in communications and secure systems made him an ideal choice for supervising a bunker that would depend on reliable contact with the outside world. During a national catastrophe, under his leadership, a small team quietly maintained the underground complex. The men working there were carefully selected. Most were veterans of military communications units, particularly the Signal Corps and Air Force radio operations. They had experience with encryption systems, emergency broadcasting, and long-range communications. Many had held high-level security clearances during their military careers. One of the technicians was John Nemchik, a retired U.S. Air Force radio operator who monitored equipment and communication networks connected to the facility. When Landis retired in 1976, management of the bunker passed to another Signal Corps veteran, Paul Eder Fritz Bugas. Bugas had spent years working with military communication systems, and he continued the quiet routine that had defined the bunker since its construction. From the outside, their work looked ordinary. Forsyth Associates maintained offices on the resort grounds where technicians appeared to service television systems used by hotel guests. They ran cables, tested broadcast signals, adjusted electronic equipment. Guests and employees assumed they were simply part of the hotel's technical infrastructure. But behind locked doors, the real work continued. The staff regularly inspected the bunker's generators, fuel reserves, and air filtration systems. Emergency communication equipment had to remain operational at all times. Secure telephone booths were tested. Broadcast studios were maintained so that members of Congress could one day deliver messages to the nation from underground. Even the massive blast doors were occasionally examined to ensure they could still seal the facility instantly if required. Outside the resort, communication antennas were installed on nearby mountaintops. These towers connected the bunker to national defense communication networks. One antenna was equipped with a nuclear flash detector, designed to sense the intense light produced by a nuclear detonation. If such a signal appeared, it could trigger emergency alert systems. Inside the bunker itself, supplies were carefully maintained. Stockpiles of military-style C-ration meals were stored in sealed containers. Medical supplies were checked and rotated to ensure they remained usable. Pharmaceuticals were kept on hand for long-term survival scenarios. Planners even prepared for the darkest possibilities. In the event that people died during an extended nuclear emergency, the facility included a pathological waste incinerator, essentially a crematorium, installed to manage human remains if necessary. The bunker had been designed for a grim reality, survival even in the aftermath of nuclear catastrophe, despite the secrecy. The resort staff around them gradually became aware that something unusual existed beneath the property. Security personnel knew there were restricted corridors they were never allowed to enter. Maintenance workers noticed locked areas that only the Forsyth technicians could access, but the culture of the Greenbrier helped preserve the secret. For generations, the resort had been the largest employer in the surrounding region of West Virginia. Many employees came from families who had worked there for decades. Loyalty to the resort was deeply ingrained. One longtime security officer later explained that staff were told the bunker existed as a safety measure, a reassurance that the country had prepared for the worst. "It makes you feel safe," he remembered being told. And so the secret remained intact. For more than 30 years, the bunker sat ready beneath the resort, its generators tested, its communications equipment maintained, its beds waiting silently in rows. Every day, above ground, guests played golf, attended conferences, and dined beneath crystal chandeliers, while far below their feet, a hidden team quietly prepared for a nuclear war that never came. The bunker beneath the Greenbrier was not built simply to exist. It was built to activate. Every system, every corridor, every bed inside the facility was part of a carefully designed emergency plan. If nuclear war erupted, time would become the most valuable resource in the United States government. Strategists understood that a Soviet missile strike could reach Washington in less than 30 minutes. That meant evacuation procedures had to move fast, very fast. Within the classified framework of Cold War civil defense, federal planners developed a doctrine known as continuity of government. The concept was simple, but enormous in its implications. Even if the capital was destroyed, the constitutional machinery of the United States had to continue operating somewhere else. The president had relocation sites. Military command centers were hidden inside hardened mountain complexes. But the legislative branch required a different solution. Hundreds of elected officials could not simply disappear without preparation. Transportation, identification, housing, communications, all had to be coordinated. The Greenbrier bunker became the planned destination. In the event of a national emergency, members of Congress would be quietly transported out of Washington and directed toward the mountains of West Virginia. The journey itself would likely take several hours. Automobile convoys, military aircraft, or chartered transport could be used depending on the warning time available. Once inside the facility, the bunker would immediately seal. Massive blast doors would close, isolating the structure from the outside world. Air filtration systems would activate to remove radioactive fallout particles. The underground generators would supply independent electrical power. Water reserves would be drawn from the facility's storage tanks. From that moment forward, the bunker would become the temporary home of the United States Congress. The scale of the plan was extraordinary. The facility had been designed to house 535 members of Congress, along with hundreds of essential support staff. Each lawmaker had an assigned bunk bed inside the dormitories. For decades, the assignments were maintained and updated. if the emergency order ever came. Every person would know exactly where to sleep. Inside the bunker, daily life would follow strict routines. Meals would be prepared in the cafeteria, capable of serving roughly 400 people at a time. Medical staff would operate from the underground infirmary if injuries or radiation sickness occurred. Communication specialists would run the broadcast studios and secure phone systems. The most important rooms, however, were the legislative chambers themselves. The House auditorium had been designed to hold all 435 representatives. Nearby, the Senate chamber could seat more than 100 senators. In theory, Congress could continue holding votes, passing emergency legislation, and maintaining the constitutional structure of the United States government. Even under nuclear attack, broadcast studios inside the bunker allowed lawmakers to address the country through radio and television. If national networks were still operating, soundproof telephone booths, equipped with cryptographic systems, allowed secure conversations with surviving military commanders or executive officials. In essence, the bunker was designed to recreate the legislative branch underground, but planners understood something else. Survival was not just physical. Psychological endurance mattered too. Living for weeks and or months inside a sealed concrete complex would test anyone. So the bunker's designers tried to soften the environment where possible. Dining areas were decorated with painted landscapes to simulate daylight. Corridors were organized to resemble ordinary office spaces. Small touches, intended to make life underground slightly more bearable. Still, the reality of the situation remained impossible to ignore. Rows of metal bunk beds, sealed blast doors, air filtration units humming constantly in the background. This was not a retreat. It was a shelter for the aftermath of nuclear war. Some planners even accounted for the darkest possibilities. If casualties occurred inside the bunker, a pathological waste incinerator had been installed to dispose of human remains safely during a prolonged crisis. The plan was thorough, almost disturbingly so. For decades, the systems were tested, generators were started, communication lines were checked, supplies were rotated and replaced to maintain readiness. The bunker stood prepared. Year after year, yet one crucial element remained uncertain: the human factor. Would members of Congress actually abandon Washington and retreat underground? Would they leave families behind? Would the evacuation even succeed during a real attack? These questions lingered quietly in the background of Cold War planning. But the bunker itself never had the chance to answer them. Because after 30 years of secrecy, the hidden facility beneath the Greenbrier was about to be discovered. And when the truth finally surfaced, one of the most carefully guarded secrets of the Cold War would suddenly become public knowledge. For more than 30 years, the bunker beneath the Greenbrier remained one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Cold War. Presidents knew, senior defense officials knew, a handful of military planners knew, but the American public, and even most members of Congress themselves, had no idea the facility existed. Lawmakers vacationed at the resort. They attended conferences in the exhibit hall directly above the hidden entrance. Some even walked past the concealed blast doors without realizing it. Below their feet, rows of bunk beds had already been assigned in their names. The silence lasted from the early 1960s into the final years of the Cold War. But by the early 1990s, the geopolitical landscape had changed dramatically. The Soviet Union was collapsing. Cold War secrecy was beginning to loosen. Journalists were increasingly investigating the hidden infrastructure of nuclear-era planning. One of those reporters was Ted Gup, working for the Washington Post. Gup had begun examining the little-known world of continuity of government programs. Rumors had circulated for years that emergency relocation sites existed for federal leadership, but documentation was scarce. Most facilities remained classified, hidden behind layers of military secrecy. Then Gup began hearing whispers about something unusual in West Virginia. A luxury resort, a mysterious group of technicians working under a private company. Restricted areas inside the hotel's newest wing. The deeper he investigated, the stranger the story became. Blueprints surfaced. Former employees quietly described hidden corridors. Architectural plans revealed massive underground chambers that did not appear on public. Construction records Gup followed the evidence piece by piece, slowly assembling a picture of what had been hidden for decades. Finally, in the spring of 1992, he was ready to publish. On May 31st, 1992, the Washington Post printed a front-page investigation. The headline revealed the secret. The article described a massive underground bunker built to house the entire United States Congress beneath the Greenbrier Resort. For the first time, the American public learned about Project Greek Island. The story spread instantly. News organizations across the country picked up the report. Television networks began asking questions. How could an entire congressional survival facility remain hidden for 30 years? Why had lawmakers never been told? And what would have happened if nuclear war had actually broken out? Inside Washington, reactions ranged from surprise to disbelief. Many members of Congress admitted they had never heard of the bunker. Some learned about their assigned bunk beds from the newspaper itself. Among the most memorable reactions came from Thomas P. Tip O'Neill. O'Neill later joked that the plan seemed unrealistic. In his words, he had no intention of running off to a bunker while leaving his wife behind. The newly elected speaker at the time, Tom Foley, declined to discuss operational details when reporters questioned him about the story. But the damage to secrecy had already been done. Within days of the article's publication, the United States government officially acknowledged the facility. The Greenbrier bunker was no longer classified, and almost immediately, the program was terminated. The staff from Forsyth Associates were withdrawn. Operational systems were shut down. After more than 3 decades of preparation, the Congressional Evacuation Shelter was quietly decommissioned. Ironically, the bunker had remained, hidden throughout some of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, decades of nuclear brinkmanship between Washington and Moscow. Yet the facility was revealed only after the global tensions that had created it were fading away. For historians, the investigation by Ted Gup became one of the most significant journalistic discoveries of Cold War infrastructure. His reporting provided the first clear public evidence that the United States government had developed detailed evacuation plans for the entire legislative branch. It also exposed the extraordinary lengths officials had taken to hide those plans in plain sight. For 30 years, thousands of visitors had passed through the Greenbrier. Resort presidents, celebrities, foreign diplomats, families on vacation, all of them unaware that one of the most unusual survival shelters ever built was sitting silently beneath the hotel floor. But once the secret was out, the bunker would begin a very different chapter of its history, one that no Cold War planner had ever imagined, because the hidden congressional refuge was about to become a public destination. Once the secret was revealed in 1992, the mission of the bunker ended almost overnight. For more than 3 decades, the underground complex had existed for one purpose: to shelter the United States Congress after a nuclear attack. But once the public knew, the secrecy that made the facility viable was gone. Within days of the exposé published by the Washington Post, federal authorities shut down the program. The technicians who had quietly maintained the bunker for years were reassigned. Equipment was powered down. Emergency protocols were canceled. The hidden congressional refuge, once one of the most guarded installations of the Cold War, suddenly became obsolete. The property itself returned fully to the control of the historic resort above it. The Greenbrier continued operating, as it always had, welcoming guests to its luxury suites, golf courses, and grand ballrooms. But beneath the surface, the bunker remained almost exactly as it had been left. Rows of metal bunk beds still lined the dormitories. The generators still stood in their massive concrete rooms. The House and Senate chambers still waited in silence. For several years, the underground complex remained largely untouched. Then the resort made a decision that surprised many observers. Instead of sealing the bunker permanently, they would open it to the public. In 1995, guided tours of the once secret facility officially began. Visitors now descend through the same corridors that Cold War planners once expected members of Congress to use during a national emergency. The tour typically begins inside the West Virginia wing, in the same exhibit hall that once concealed the bunker's main entrance. Hidden doors that had once been designed to seal the complex during nuclear war now slide open for curious visitors. From there, Guests enter the secured interior corridors of the underground complex. The experience is striking. Just 60 feet above, the resort remains one of the most luxurious destinations in the United States. Crystal chandeliers, ornate dining rooms, presidential suites, but inside the bunker, the environment is stark. Concrete walls, industrial lighting, long dormitories filled with rows of identical steel bunk beds. A space designed not for comfort, but survival. Visitors walk through the congressional chambers where emergency legislative sessions were meant to take place. The House Auditorium still contains hundreds of seats, arranged in the same configuration used by the real chamber in Washington nearby. The Senate meeting room remains intact. Elsewhere in the bunker, guests see the cafeteria where lawmakers would have eaten during confinement. Tables remain set in the dining area. Painted murals still decorate the walls, landscape. Scenes meant to simulate daylight. For people living underground, guides lead visitors past the infirmary, where medical teams could have treated injuries or radiation sickness. They pass the broadcast studios where members of Congress might have addressed the surviving nation through radio and television. Then deeper inside, visitors encounter the massive machinery that kept the facility alive. The two-story diesel generators, the water storage systems, the powerful air filtration units designed to strip radioactive particles from incoming air. These systems once made it possible for hundreds of people to survive underground for extended periods. Even today, much of the equipment remains in place, preserved almost exactly as it appeared during the Cold War. Over the years, the bunker has become one of the most unusual historical attractions in the United States. Historians, journalists, and visitors from around the world travel to see it. The facility has been featured in documentaries, television programs, and historical publications examining Cold War planning. Yet the bunker still retains another unexpected function. Part of the underground complex has been leased as a secure data storage facility. The same reinforced concrete, blast-resistant architecture, and independent power systems that once protected the United States, Congress now provide ideal conditions for safeguarding digital information. It is a strange transformation, a place built for nuclear war, now protecting computer servers. But perhaps the most powerful part of visiting the bunker is the contrast. Above ground, the Greenbrier continues to operate as a luxurious resort filled with music, dining, and social events. Below ground, the Cold War still lingers in concrete corridors. Rows of empty bunk beds, silent generators, rooms that were designed for a moment that never arrived. Today, the bunker stands not as a military installation, but as a preserved reminder of how seriously the world once prepared for nuclear catastrophe. A hidden chapter of history, now open for anyone willing to walk underground and see it for themselves. By the time the bunker beneath the Greenbrier became public, the Cold War itself was already fading into history. The Soviet Union had dissolved in 1991. The decades-long standoff between nuclear superpowers was ending. But the discovery of the bunker revealed something deeper than a secret building. It revealed the mindset of an entire era. For historians, the Greenbrier bunker quickly became one of the most powerful physical symbols of Cold War fear, a hidden structure built not for war itself, but for what would come after. The assumption that nuclear weapons might actually be used, and that government leaders would have to survive in order to rebuild a functioning nation. The bunker demonstrated how far that thinking had gone. Entire branches of government had prepared for relocation. Secret facilities were scattered across the country. Mountains were hollowed out. Emergency communication networks were built, all to ensure that the constitutional framework of the United States could survive even the destruction of its capital. In that sense, the Greenbrier bunker was not just an engineering project. It was a reflection of the psychological landscape of the 20th century, an era when nuclear weapons had made total annihilation a realistic possibility. During those years, Americans lived with a strange contradiction. Above ground, everyday life continued. Children went to school, families watched television, cities expanded. But beneath that normality, governments quietly prepared for the worst-case scenario. Civil defense drills became part of childhood. Classroom films taught students to duck under desks during atomic blasts. Families stocked basements with canned food and emergency supplies. The bunker represented the highest level of that same logic. If ordinary citizens needed shelters, then surely the government itself required one. Yet the plan also raised uncomfortable questions. Even during the Cold War, some observers wondered whether such preparations were realistic. Could hundreds of lawmakers actually be evacuated before a nuclear strike? Would elected officials abandon their families to hide underground? Would the system function normally under those conditions? When the bunker became public, those questions resurfaced again. Former Speaker of the House Thomas P. Tip O'Neill famously expressed skepticism about the idea. He later remarked that the plan seemed impractical, especially if it meant leaving loved ones behind during a national disaster. But whether or not the evacuation plan would have worked, the bunker still revealed something important. It showed how deeply the Cold War shaped government planning. For decades, officials genuinely believed that nuclear war was possible, not just as a theoretical event, but as a scenario that required detailed preparation. Investigative journalist Ted Gup later described the Greenbrier facility as part of what he called the architecture of fear, network of hidden bunkers and command centers built during the nuclear age, structures designed to preserve authority, even when civilization itself might be collapsing. Today, visitors walking through the underground halls often feel that tension immediately. The rooms are quiet, the concrete walls feel heavy, and the rows of empty bunk beds carry an eerie implication. Every bed once had a name attached to it: a senator, a representative, a leader who might have lived underground while the outside world struggled to recover. It forces a strange realization. For 30 years, the United States government had a plan for surviving nuclear war, and that plan was waiting silently beneath a luxury resort. In many ways, the bunker has become a historical artifact of the nuclear age, a monument to the fears that defined the 20th century, but also a reminder of something else: human beings preparing, as carefully as possible, for a future they desperately hoped would never happen. For more than 30 years, the bunker beneath the Greenbrier waited in silence. Generators were tested, supplies were rotated, beds were assigned to members of Congress, and every system remained ready for a moment that planners hoped would never arrive. Above ground, life continued as normal. Guests checked into the resort. Politicians attended conferences. Families walked through the same exhibit hall that concealed the bunker's hidden doors. Few of them realized that beneath their feet, the United States government had prepared for the possibility of nuclear apocalypse. It is easy today, decades later, to see the bunker as a strange artifact of another time. But during the Cold War, the fear was real. Intercontinental ballistic missiles could cross continents in minutes. Entire cities could vanish in a flash of light. And the survival of governments, even democracies, suddenly depended on underground concrete and steel. The bunker at the Greenbrier was one small piece of a vast network of contingency plans, a system designed to ensure that the constitutional structure of the United States could continue, even if Washington itself no longer existed. But the bunker also raises difficult questions that planners in the 1950s and 1960s quietly debated behind closed doors. If nuclear war had actually happened, would members of Congress have made it there in time? Would evacuation orders have reached everyone before missiles arrived? Would lawmakers really have left their families behind and retreated underground? And even if they had, what kind of country would remain to govern? These questions still echo through the empty corridors today. Visitors walk past rows of metal bunk beds, each once assigned to a specific lawmaker. They stand inside the underground House chamber, imagining emergency votes held beneath layers of earth and concrete. They see the sealed blast doors, the filtration systems, the generators designed to keep hundreds of people alive while the world above struggled to recover. The bunker forces a realization. For decades, world leaders believed nuclear war was not only possible, but probable enough to prepare for. The Cold War created a strange kind of architecture: hidden command posts, secret relocation sites, underground cities built to preserve authority in the aftermath of catastrophe. Investigative journalist Ted Gup once described these places as monuments to the psychology of the nuclear age, structures built from fear, uncertainty, and the desperate hope that civilization could survive its own weapons. Today, the bunker remains where it has always been, silent, preserved, a time capsule buried beneath the mountains of West Virginia. A place built to protect democracy by hiding it underground. And perhaps the most unsettling thought is this. If the Cold War had turned hot, if the alarms had sounded, if convoys of lawmakers had raced toward the mountains, the history of the United States might have continued not in Washington, but in this hidden concrete world beneath a resort hotel. So the next time you hear the words Cold War, or see images of nuclear drills from the 1950s, remember this place, a luxury resort above ground, a congressional survival bunker below. Two completely different worlds, existing at the same address for more than 30 years. One question still lingers. If humanity ever faced that kind of moment again, would we build places like this? Or have we learned enough from history to ensure they are never needed? If you enjoy deep historical mysteries like this, the hidden stories of the Cold War, secret government projects, and the places history almost forgot, make sure you subscribe, because some of the most fascinating chapters of our past are still buried underground and waiting to be discovered.